The hardest truth I've ever faced wasn't losing my husband to cancer or watching my retirement savings dwindle during the recession. It was the day I overheard my son, Richard, casually tell his wife that I was just the maid who happens to be my mother. 30 years of sacrificing everything for him, working 2 jobs to put him through college, postponing my own dreams, and that's how he saw me. His personal housekeeper with a genetic connection. What he didn't know was that I still controlled the one thing he'd been counting on, his inheritance. The house I'd maintained for decades, the investments, the land in Colorado, all of it was still in my name. The next morning, I called Patricia Henderson, the sharpest estate attorney in Denver. 2 weeks later, I had completely rewritten my will. But this isn't a story about revenge. It's about reclaiming your worth when the people who should value you most treat you like you're disposable. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. For 28 years, I raised my son Richard single-handedly after my husband Thomas died from lung cancer. I was 32 then, with a 10-year-old boy and a mountain of medical debt. Thomas had been a good man, hard-working, kind, but insurance only covered so much of his 3-year battle. The rest fell to me. I remember sitting at our kitchen table the night after the funeral, bills spread out like a patchwork quilt of despair, calculating how long our savings would last. 6 months? Maybe 8 if I was careful. I had been a part-time bookkeeper for a construction company while Thomas was alive, but that wouldn't be enough now. By the end of that week, I had taken a second job waiting tables at Malone's Steakhouse, on evenings and weekends. My mother, bless her heart, would watch Richard until I got home at midnight. I'd tiptoe into his room, bone-tired but determined, and kiss his forehead, promising him silently that somehow we'd be okay. When my mother's arthritis got too bad for her to help with Richard, I switched to the morning shift at a local bakery, up at 3 a.m., home in time to see Richard off to school, then to the bookkeeping job, then home to make dinner, help with homework, and collapse into bed by 9 p.m. Rinse and repeat, day after day, year after year. Despite the exhaustion, I never missed a parent-teacher conference. I was at every baseball game, sitting in the bleachers in my waitress uniform, sometimes falling asleep between innings but jolting awake whenever Richard came up to bat. I learned to cook his favorite meals. On a tight budget, pot roast that could stretch for days, homemade macaroni and cheese that was better than the boxed kind his friends ate. I mended his clothes, helped with science fair projects, and read him bedtime stories long after he claimed he was too old for them. When Richard was 16, he mentioned college for the first time. He wanted to attend Westbridge University, one of the most expensive private schools in the state. I remember the way my stomach dropped when I saw the tuition costs, but I smiled and said, "We'll find a way." That night, after he went to bed, I opened a new spreadsheet and started a college fund. I picked up extra shifts, sold my wedding ring, and gave up my one luxury, the monthly book club meeting at Barnes & Noble where I would treat myself to a paperback and a coffee. The proudest moment of my life was watching Richard walk across that stage at Westbridge, tassel swinging, to accept his business degree. I was in the audience, clapping until my hands were raw, tears streaming down my face. All those double shifts, all those missed opportunities for myself, they were worth it for this moment. After graduation, Richard moved to Seattle for his first job. I stayed in Denver, in the same 3-bedroom ranch house where we'd lived since he was born. Thomas and I had purchased it with a 30-year mortgage just before Richard arrived. I'd finally paid it off the same year Richard graduated college, a coincidence that felt somehow poetic. I continued working as a bookkeeper, slowly building my own retirement fund now that Richard was on his own. We spoke every Sunday, and twice a year I would fly out to Seattle to visit. Richard seemed to be thriving, climbing the corporate ladder at a marketing firm, meeting Amanda, falling in love. When Richard announced their engagement, I was overjoyed. Amanda was sharp, ambitious, and seemed to make Richard happy. I offered to help with the wedding expenses, even though it meant dipping into my modest savings. "Mom, you don't have to do that," Richard said. But I insisted. It was what parents did. The wedding was beautiful, a stunning affair at a waterfront venue in Seattle. I wore a pale blue dress that I'd saved for months to afford and danced with my son under twinkling lights. That night, Richard hugged me tight and whispered, "I couldn't have done any of this without you, Mom." Those words warmed me for years afterward. After the wedding, the phone calls became less frequent. Richard and Amanda were busy building their life together, and I understood that. I kept myself occupied with work, my garden, and the book club I'd finally rejoined. I dated occasionally, nothing serious, and took a watercolor class at the community center. Life was quieter than it had been, but peaceful. Then, 3 years after the wedding, Richard called with news. Amanda was pregnant. They were moving back to Denver to be closer to family as they started their own. Amanda's parents lived in Boulder, just an hour away, and Richard suggested it would be good for the baby to have both sets of grandparents nearby. "We're looking at houses in your area, Mom," he said. "Would you be willing to help us with the down payment? It would just be a loan, until my year-end bonus comes through." Without hesitation, I said yes. I had been saving for so long, living frugally out of habit, and having Richard and his family nearby seemed worth any price. I transferred $40,000 to his account, nearly half of my retirement savings, and helped them find a beautiful Tudor-style home just 15 minutes from mine. Richard and Amanda moved in a month before their son, my grandson Thomas, named after his grandfather, was born. I was at the hospital, holding Amanda's hand through a difficult delivery, bringing home-cooked meals to their house, doing laundry while Amanda recovered. When Richard went back to work after his 2 weeks of paternity leave, I took vacation time to stay with Amanda and the baby. "You're a lifesaver, Elaine," Amanda would say, gratefully accepting whatever help I offered, and I was happy to give it. Thomas was a beautiful baby, with Richard's eyes and Amanda's dimples. I fell in love with him instantly. Months passed, and Richard never mentioned repaying the loan for the down payment. I didn't bring it up. What was money compared to being part of my grandson's life? I continued to help whenever they asked, babysitting on date nights, bringing dinner when they were overwhelmed, taking Thomas for weekends when they needed a break. By Thomas's first birthday, I had officially retired from bookkeeping, although I kept a few private clients to supplement my Social Security. Richard suggested I could watch Thomas full-time now, saving them the cost of daycare. "It would be perfect, Mom," he said. "You love spending time with him anyway, and we'd pay you something. Not as much as daycare, obviously, but enough to help with your expenses." I agreed, not because I needed the money, but because I wanted to be part of Thomas's life. And truthfully, after decades of working multiple jobs, retirement felt strange, too quiet, too empty. Having a purpose again, especially one that kept me close to my family, seemed ideal. That was 5 years ago. 5 years of arriving at their house at 7 a.m., watching Thomas grow from a toddler to a lively kindergartner, preparing meals, tidying up, doing laundry, and leaving at 6 p.m. when Richard or Amanda got home from work. The something they paid me turned out to be $200 a week, less than half the going rate for full-time childcare, but I never complained. This wasn't about money. It was about family. At least, that's what I told myself until the day everything changed. It was a Tuesday in April. I had picked Thomas up from kindergarten and brought him back to Richard and Amanda's house for lunch. He was upstairs taking his nap when Richard came home unexpectedly early. He didn't see me in the kitchen, where I was quietly folding a basket of clean laundry. He went straight to his home office and made a phone call. "Hey, Mark, it's Richard. Listen, about that fishing trip this weekend." There was a pause. "No, it's not a problem. My mom watches Thomas all the time. She's basically just the maid, who happens to be my mother." He laughed, a sound that cut through me like glass. "Seriously, it's the perfect arrangement. She's happy to have something to do, and we get free childcare and housekeeping. Anyway, I can definitely make it this weekend." I stood frozen, the warm laundry still in my hands, as the words echoed in my mind. Just the maid who happens to be my mother. Free childcare and housekeeping. The perfect arrangement. I finished folding the clothes methodically, each movement careful and controlled. When Richard emerged from his office, I was sitting at the kitchen table, hands folded in my lap. "Mom, didn't know you were still here," he said, startled. "Thomas is napping," I replied, my voice steady despite the hurricane in my chest. "I was just finishing up the laundry." He nodded absently, grabbing a soda from the fridge. "Great, thanks." "Hey, I'm heading back to the office. Big project due tomorrow." I nodded. "Of course, I'll be here until Amanda gets home." He kissed my cheek, the same way he had 1,000 times before, and left. I sat at that table for a long time, staring at nothing, feeling something fundamental shift inside me. Just the maid. After 28 years of sacrifice, after giving him everything I had and then some, that's how he saw me, as the help. Convenient, useful, disposable. Thomas woke up from his nap an hour later. I read him a story, helped him with an art project, and prepared a snack. I acted normal, smiled when appropriate, answered his endless questions with patience. But inside, something had broken. When Amanda came home at 5:30, I gathered my things and left without mentioning what I'd overheard. I drove home in silence, no radio, no tears, just a strange, hollow feeling spreading through my chest. That night, I pulled out all of my financial documents, the deed to my house, my will, bank, statements, investment accounts, everything Richard stood to inherit someday. Everything I had worked so hard to build while also building his life. And I made a decision that would change everything. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The morning after overhearing Richard's phone call, I arrived at his house as usual at 7 a.m. I maintained my composure, smiling as I helped Thomas get ready for school. Inside, though, a storm was brewing. 30 years of memories shifting and realigning themselves into a new, uncomfortable pattern. For a week, I continued as if nothing had changed. I watched Thomas, prepared meals, tidied the house, all while wrestling with the knowledge that my own son saw me as the help, rather than as his mother. Every smile from Richard now felt hollow. Every casual, "Thanks, Mom," tinged with a new, bitter understanding. On Friday afternoon, as I was preparing dinner, Amanda came home early. She seemed distracted, barely acknowledging my presence as she set her laptop on the kitchen island and began typing furiously. "Rough day?" I asked, sliding a cup of tea toward her. She glanced up, startled, as if she'd forgotten I was there. "Oh, yes, actually. The Wilson account is a nightmare." She took the tea absently. "Listen, Elaine, I've been meaning to talk to you about something?" I wiped my hands on a dish towel and sat down across from her. "What's on your mind?" Amanda closed her laptop and folded her hands on top of it. Her diamond engagement ring, the one I had helped Richard choose, dipping into my savings to help him afford something worthy of her, caught the light. "Richard and I have been thinking that Thomas is getting older now. He'll be starting first grade in the fall, and we think it's important for him to develop more independence." I nodded slowly, waiting for her to continue. "We're considering an after-school program for him. It would give him a chance to socialize more with children. His age, get involved in structured activities. Set him up for success." She took a sip of her tea, not quite meeting my eyes. "It would mean we wouldn't need you here full-time anymore." There it was, the dismissal I had been bracing for since hearing Richard's words. I had expected it would come from him, not Amanda. But perhaps they had decided she would be better at delivering the news. "I see," I said, my voice steady. "What would you need from me instead?" Amanda brightened, clearly relieved I wasn't making a scene. "Well, we thought maybe you could still pick him up from the after-school program twice a week. That would give us some flexibility with our work schedules, and of course we'd still want you to watch him during school holidays and summer breaks." I studied her face, the practiced smile, the way her eyes kept darting to her laptop as if the conversation was keeping her from more important matters. This woman, who had benefited from my financial support, my child care, my endless accommodation of their needs, was now parceling out my time with my grandson like she was doing me a favor. "And the payment?" I asked quietly. Amanda's smile faltered. "Well, since it would be so much less time, we thought. I mean, we wouldn't be able to pay you the same amount, obviously. But maybe $50 a week? For gas and such? $50. Less than what it would cost them to hire a teenager for the same hours. But this wasn't about money. It never had been. This was about respect, about recognition of my worth beyond what services I could provide. "I'll need to think about it," I said, rising from my seat. "When would this new arrangement start?" "Next Monday, ideally." Amanda had already reopened her laptop, her attention drifting back to her work. "The program has an opening and we don't want to lose it. 3 days' notice. After 5 years of full-time childcare, they were giving me 3 days' notice." "I see," I said again, turning back to the stove where dinner was simmering. "I'll let you know my decision tomorrow." Amanda murmured something that might have been thanks, already absorbed in her email. I finished cooking dinner in silence, set the table, and gathered my things to leave. "Aren't you staying to eat with us?" Amanda asked, looking up briefly. "Not tonight," I replied. "I have some things to take care of at home." I kissed Thomas goodbye and left before Richard came home. As I drove away, I watched the house recede in my rearview mirror. The house my money had helped purchase, where I had poured so much of myself into creating a home for my family. The next morning, called Patricia Henderson, the estate attorney. Her office was in a sleek downtown building with views of the mountains. I sat across from her, my financial documents spread out between us, and explained my situation. She listened without interruption, her expression neutral but attentive. "So, Mrs. Bennett," she said when I finished, "you want to revise your will to disinherit your son?" "Not entirely," I clarified. "I want to ensure my grandson is provided for, but I want to restructure everything so that Richard cannot access or control any of it." Patricia nodded, making notes. "We can set up a trust for your grandson that would become accessible to him when he turns 25. Your son would have no legal claim to those funds. And the house? The house is fully in your name. You're free to do with it as you wish." I thought about the 3-bedroom ranch that had been home for so many years. It needed updates. The kitchen was outdated. The roof would need replacing soon. But it was mine, paid for with decades of hard work. "I want to protect everything," I said finally. "I don't want Richard to benefit from my estate when he's made it clear that he sees me as an employee rather than a mother." Patricia leaned forward, her expression softening slightly. "Mrs. Bennett, I've worked with many families in situations like yours. Before we proceed, I want to make sure this is really what you want. Have you tried discussing your feelings with your son?" I appreciated her caution, but my mind was made up. "Patricia, for 30 years I've put my son first. His education, his comfort, his future. I've given him money whenever he's asked, supported his dreams, helped him build the life he wanted. And in return, he sees me as just the maid. No, I haven't confronted him about it yet. But I will. And before I do, I want to make sure my assets are protected." She nodded, seemingly satisfied with my resolution. "All right then, let's get started." For the next 2 hours, we went through my assets one by one: the house, my modest investment portfolio, my checking and savings accounts, a small life insurance policy. Everything Richard had counted on inheriting someday. By the time we finished, I had a clear plan. 75% of my estate would go into a trust for Thomas, accessible when he turned 25, with provisions for educational expenses before that. The remaining 25% would be divided among several charities I cared about. Richard would receive a token inheritance of $1,000, enough to make it clear that his omission was intentional, not an oversight. It will take a few days to draw up the paperwork, Patricia said as she walked me to the door. Will you be okay in the meantime? I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. Yes, I think I will be. That afternoon, I texted Amanda. After careful consideration, I've decided I won't be able to continue with the childcare arrangement you proposed. I think it's best if I step back entirely. I'll always be available for emergencies, of course, but I think you're right that Thomas needs to develop his independence. Her response came quickly. Oh, are you sure? We were really counting on you for those 2 days. I didn't reply. When I arrived at Richard's house on Monday morning to collect the few personal items I'd left there over the years, a cardigan, some books, a favorite mug, both Richard and Amanda were home, their expressions a mix of confusion and annoyance. Mom, what's going on? Richard demanded as I gathered my things from the guest room closet. Amanda said you quit. I folded my cardigan neatly and placed it in my bag. Not quit, Richard. Retired. Again. You were right that Thomas is getting older, and an after-school program will be good for him. But we still need you for those 2 days, he insisted. Amanda has meetings she can't reschedule, and I've got clients. I'm sure you'll figure something out, I interrupted, my voice calm but firm. You're both smart, capable people with good incomes. Childcare is part of being a parent. Richard stared at me as if I'd started speaking in tongues. Mom, is this about money? If it is, we can discuss. It's not about money, I said, zipping my bag closed. It's about respect. It's about recognizing that I'm your mother, not your employee, and certainly not your maid. His face went pale. What are you talking about? I heard you on the phone last week, Richard, talking to Mark about your fishing trip, about how I'm just the maid who happens to be your mother, about your perfect arrangement with free childcare and housekeeping. Amanda's eyes widened, darting between Richard and me. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. No words coming out. I've given you everything I had to give, I continued, my voice still steady. And I would have continued giving if you had seen it as a gift rather than an entitlement. But you didn't, so now I'm going to give to myself for a while. I shouldered my bag and walked past them toward the front door. Richard finally found his voice. Mom, wait. You can't just leave like this. We need to talk about this. I turned back one last time. We will, Richard, but not today. Today, I'm going home. And with that, I walked out the door, leaving my son and daughter-in-law staring after me in shocked silence. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across my front yard as I pulled into the driveway of my ranch house. For the first time in 5 years, I was home on a Monday at 4 p.m. with no grandson to care for, no dinner to prepare for someone else's family. The silence enveloped me as I unlocked the door and stepped inside. My house had become little more than a place to sleep in recent years. I'd spent so much time at Richard and Amanda's that my own living space felt almost unfamiliar, a museum of my former life rather than a home. Framed photographs lined the mantel. Richard's graduation, his wedding day, Thomas as a newborn, milestones I had funded, organized, celebrated, and photographed. I moved through the rooms slowly, touching furniture, opening curtains, reacquainting myself with the space that was mine alone. In the kitchen, I opened the refrigerator, nearly empty except for some yogurt and a carton of eggs. The pantry held a few cans of soup and some crackers. My life had been centered elsewhere for so long that I'd neglected my own home, my own needs. That would change starting today. I made a list: groceries, garden supplies, paint samples for the living room. Projects I'd put off for years while prioritizing Richard's needs. Then I called my old friend Marjorie, whom I hadn't seen in months. "Elaine!" Her voice was warm, surprised. "I was just thinking about you yesterday. How's that precious grandson of yours?" "Thomas is wonderful," I said, settling into my armchair. "But I'm actually calling about myself. I've made some changes recently, and I find myself with free time again. I wondered if you might want to revive our Thursday lunch tradition." Marjorie's excitement was palpable. "I would love that. The book club hasn't been the same without you, you know. None of us can make lemon squares like yours." We chatted for nearly an hour, catching up on each other's lives. Marjorie had retired from teaching 2 years ago and had taken up pottery. Her daughter had just had a baby, her third grandchild. Her husband's arthritis was acting up again. Normal, everyday things that friends share. When we hung up, I felt a warmth I had almost forgotten, the simple pleasure of connection that wasn't based on obligation or need, but on genuine affection and shared history. The next morning, I drove to Parkview Garden Center and filled my trunk with seedlings, tomatoes, peppers, zucchini, and flowers in every color. The garden in my backyard had been neglected for years, overtaken by weeds and patchy grass. Now it would become my sanctuary. I worked the soil carefully, pulling weeds, turning earth, adding compost. My muscles protested after years of disuse, but the pain felt cleansing somehow. With each plant I settled into the ground, I felt more rooted myself, more present in my own life. By mid-afternoon, my phone was buzzing with messages from Richard. I glanced at them but didn't respond. "Mom, we need to talk." "Mom, please call me back." "Mom, this isn't fair to Thomas." I silenced the phone and continued gardening. That evening, as I soaked in a hot bath to ease my aching muscles, I allowed myself to fully feel the loss, not just of my role in Thomas's life, but of the relationship with Richard I had thought I had. The son who had once whispered that he couldn't have done anything without me now saw me as convenient help. When had that transformation happened? Had it always been there, hidden beneath the surface of our relationship? I cried then, for the first time since overhearing Richard's words. Deep, wrenching sobs that left me breathless. I cried for the years spent sacrificing my own needs, for the retirement savings depleted to fund Richard's house, for the countless hours spent caring for a family that didn't truly value me. And then, slowly, I began to cry for something else entirely. For the Elaine I had never allowed to exist. The woman who might have traveled or taken classes or dated seriously after Thomas died. The woman who had dreams beyond seeing her son succeed. It was time to meet her at last. The following days established a new rhythm. Mornings in the garden. Afternoons working on the house, patching small holes in the drywall, painting the guest bathroom a cheerful yellow, organizing closets. I called a realtor to discuss what updates would add the most value to the property, not because I planned to sell, but because I wanted my home to reflect my worth. I rejoined the book club, reconnected with old friends, and even signed up for a watercolor class at the community center. Small steps toward reclaiming my identity beyond motherhood. Richard continued calling and texting, his messages growing increasingly frustrated. "You can't just disappear like this." Thomas keeps asking. "For you. We need to resolve this." After a week of silence, I finally texted back, "I'm not disappearing. I'm living my life. I'm happy to see Thomas, but it will be on my terms, not as unpaid help. When you're ready to have a real conversation about respect, I'll be here." His response was immediate. "This is ridiculous. You're punishing us because of one comment you overheard out of context." I didn't reply. There was no point explaining that it wasn't just the comment. It was the years of taking me for granted, the casual assumption that my time and resources were endlessly available to them, the swift dismissal when they decided they needed me less. Instead, I focused on rebuilding. I made an appointment with a financial advisor to discuss how to best manage what remained of my savings after helping Richard with his down payment. The advisor, a practical woman named Diane, reviewed my accounts with a critical eye. "The loan to your son for the house down payment," she said, tapping her pen against the statement. "Was there any formal agreement about repayment?" I shook my head. It was a verbal agreement. He said he'd pay me back after his year-end bonus. And that was how long ago? 6 years. Diane made a note. And there's been no repayment at all? No. She set down her pen and looked at me directly. "Elaine, I'm going to be very honest with you. Your retirement funds are lower than they should be for someone your age. The money you gave your son represents a significant portion of what you should have available. If you're serious about securing your future, we need to address this." Her words landed heavily. I had always viewed financial support for Richard as an extension of my role as his mother. I had never considered that in giving to him, I might be endangering my own security. "What do you suggest?" I asked. "First, we should formalize the loan. Draw up paperwork, establish a repayment schedule. It's not too late to do this." "And if he refuses?" Diane's expression was sympathetic but firm. "Then you have decisions to make about how to proceed. But at the very least, having documentation will protect you in the future, especially given the changes you're making to your will." I left her office with homework, gathering documentation of the money transfer, drafting a formal loan agreement, preparing to have yet another difficult conversation with Richard. But beneath the anxiety was a growing sense of empowerment. I was taking control of my finances, my future, my worth. That Sunday, I attended church for the first time in months. Pastor Miller greeted me warmly, asking about Thomas and Richard. I gave brief, polite answers, not ready to share the full truth with my congregation yet. During the service, I found myself unexpectedly moved by the sermon on forgiveness. Not just forgiving others, but forgiving oneself. Had I been too harsh with Richard? Was I overreacting to one careless comment? As I pondered this, my phone vibrated in my purse. Another text from Richard. "Amanda and I talked. We can increase the payment to $100 a week if you'll reconsider helping with Thomas. We really need you, Mom. They needed me. Or rather, they needed my services." Not once in his messages had Richard acknowledged how his words had hurt me. Not once had he recognized me as anything more than a solution to their childcare problem. I tucked the phone away without responding and focused on the closing hymn. The melody washed over me, familiar and comforting. For the first time in years, I wasn't rushing through the service, anxious to get to Richard's house to help prepare Sunday dinner. I could simply be present, be still, be Elaine. After the service, I accepted an invitation to coffee with some church members I'd known for years, but never spent time with outside of Sunday mornings. We sat in the church hall, discussing books. Local politics, grandchildren. I mentioned my watercolor class, and one woman, Susan, brightened. "I've been wanting to try that. Is there room for another student?" Just like that, a casual acquaintance was becoming a friend. A small miracle, but one that reminded me that life could expand in unexpected ways when I made room for it. As I drove home, I felt a sense of peace settling over me. The anger and hurt were still there, but they had company now. Determination, hope, curiosity about what my life could become. I wasn't just retreating from Richard's dismissal. I was advancing toward a future of my own design. That evening, Patricia Henderson called to let me know the revised will was ready for my signature. We scheduled an appointment for the following morning. Are you still comfortable with these changes, Elaine? She asked. It's a significant decision. I looked around my living room, freshly painted a warm sage green, and at the garden visible through the window, where new plants were already beginning to flourish. Yes, I said with quiet certainty. I'm very comfortable with it. 3 weeks passed without contact from Richard beyond his increasingly infrequent text messages. I had signed the new will, restructured my financial accounts with Diane's help, and established a comfortable routine centered on my own interests and needs. My garden was flourishing. The house was beginning to feel like mine again. I had lunch with Marjorie every Thursday and had started joining Susan for coffee after watercolor class on Tuesdays. Then, on a Wednesday morning in May, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Thomas standing on my porch, his Spider-Man backpack slung over one shoulder, Richard hovering behind him with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Grandma!" Thomas launched himself at me, wrapping his arms around my waist. I hugged him tight, breathing in the familiar scent of his shampoo and the faint trace of peanut butter that seemed to follow him everywhere. "Hello, sweetheart," I said, then looked up at Richard. "This is a surprise." Richard shifted uncomfortably. "Thomas has been asking to see you. He misses you." I stepped back, ushering them inside. The house looked different now. Walls freshly painted, new curtains hanging in the living room, potted plants on the windowsills. Richard glanced around, noting the changes without comment. "Grandma, you changed your house," Thomas exclaimed, taking it all in. "It's so pretty now." I smiled, ruffling his hair. "Thank you. I've been doing some redecorating." "Can I see the garden?" "Dad says you have a garden now." "Of course," I said, leading him toward the back door. "I planted tomatoes, just like you like." As Thomas raced ahead to the backyard, Richard hung back. "Mom, we need to talk," he said quietly. "This has gone on long enough." I turned to face him. "I agree, but not in front of Thomas. Why don't we let him explore the garden while we chat?" In the kitchen, I poured 2 glasses of iced tea and set one before Richard at the table. Through the window, I could see Thomas, examining my vegetable plants with intense concentration. "He's been asking about you every day," Richard began. "Wondering why you don't come over anymore, why he can't visit. We didn't know what to tell him." "The truth would have been a good start," I replied, keeping my voice level. "That Grandma isn't just the help." Richard flinched. "Mom, about what you overheard. It wasn't what you think. I was just talking to Mark. You know how he is, always bragging about his nanny and housekeeper. I was just what? Trying to sound important? Minimizing our relationship to impress your friend?" I shook my head. "It doesn't matter why. You said it, Richard. What matters is that you said it at all. And more importantly, you acted on it when Amanda decided to cut back my time with Thomas." He sighed, running a hand through his hair, a gesture so reminiscent of his father that it momentarily softened my resolve. "We didn't handle that well. I know that now. Amanda was just trying to do what she thought was best for Thomas." "And what about what's best for me?" I asked. "Did either of you consider that?" Richard looked genuinely confused. "What do you mean?" "I mean that for 5 years I've structured my entire life around your family's needs. I retired from my bookkeeping job to watch Thomas full-time. I've given up friends, hobbies, my own space, and when you decided you needed me less, you gave me 3 days' notice and offered me what amounts to gas money." "It wasn't like that," he protested. "It was exactly like that." I sipped my tea, gathering my thoughts. "Richard, do you remember when you asked me for help with the down payment on your house?" He nodded hesitantly. "You promised to pay me back after your year-end bonus. That was 6 years ago. $40,000 of my retirement savings, never mentioned again." His face flushed. "Things have been tight, Mom. The mortgage, Thomas's school, Amanda's student loans. And yet Amanda has a new car. You take fishing trips with your friends. You go out to dinner 3 times a week. You're not poor, Richard. You just assumed I didn't need to be repaid. He didn't respond, his gaze dropping to the table. I've had a financial advisor review my accounts, I continued. At my age, with what I have saved, I should be concerned about my future. That $40,000 represents a significant portion of my safety net. Now, Richard looked alarmed. Are you in financial trouble? Why didn't you say something? I'm not in trouble yet, I clarified. But I could be if I continue allowing you to treat my resources, my time, my money, my home, as an extension of your own. Thomas burst through the back door at that moment, his hands cupped carefully around something. Grandma, look what I found in your garden. He opened his palms to reveal a small green caterpillar inching across his skin. That's a tomato hornworm, I explained, temporarily setting aside the tense conversation with Richard. They eat tomato plants, so we'll need to move him somewhere else. Thomas's eyes widened. Can we build him a home? With leaves and sticks? I smiled. Of course we can. Let's find a jar. For the next half hour, Richard sat silently at the kitchen table while Thomas and I created a habitat for the caterpillar, complete with fresh leaves and a twig for climbing. The joy on my grandson's face as we worked together was a sharp reminder of what I'd been missing these past weeks. When the caterpillar was settled in its new home, I suggested Thomas take it to the living room to draw a picture of it. As soon as he was out of earshot, Richard leaned forward. Mom, I had no idea you felt this way. About the money, about how we treated you. I guess I always thought you wanted to help us, that it made you happy. It did make me happy, I acknowledged. Being part of Thomas's life, watching him grow, that has been one of the greatest joys of my life. But somewhere along the way, you and Amanda began to take that joy as an entitlement. My help became an expectation rather than a gift. Richard was quiet for a long moment. So, what happens now? He finally asked. Are you cutting us off? Cutting Thomas off? No, I said firmly. I would never punish Thomas for your actions, but things are going to be different. If you want me to spend time with Thomas, it will be as his grandmother, not as free childcare. If you need financial help, we'll discuss it like adults, with formal agreements and repayment plans. He nodded slowly, processing this. And the $40,000? I've drawn up a repayment agreement with my attorney. 10 years. Low interest. It's more than fair. Richard's expression tightened. Mom, we can't afford to start making payments on that right now. You've had 6 years of not making payments, I pointed out. The agreement includes a 6-month grace period before the first payment is due. That should give you time to adjust your budget. Before Richard could respond, Thomas called from the living room. Grandma, Dad, come see my picture. We joined him in the living room, where he proudly displayed a crayon drawing of the caterpillar, complete with exaggerated antennae and a smiling face. It's beautiful, sweetheart, I said. Would you like to put it on my refrigerator? Thomas nodded enthusiastically, and I helped him attach it with a magnet shaped like a sunflower, a small piece of my grandson reclaiming space in my home. Richard checked his watch. We should probably get going, buddy. Grandma has things to do. Actually, I interjected, I was thinking Thomas might like to stay for lunch. I bought the ingredients for those grilled cheese sandwiches he likes, the ones with 3 kinds of cheese. Thomas's face lit up. Can I, Dad? Please? Richard hesitated, then nodded. Sure, I have some errands to run anyway. I can pick you up. In a couple of hours. After Richard left, Thomas and I spent a pleasant morning making sandwiches, checking on the caterpillar and playing board games. He chattered about school, his friends, the after-school program he now attended 3 days a week. I listened attentively, treasuring these moments I had missed. Grandma, he said as we cleared the lunch dishes, why don't you come to our house anymore? Are you mad at Dad and Mom? I chose my words carefully. I'm not mad, sweetheart. Sometimes, grown-ups need to figure out new ways of being together. Your mom and dad and I are working on that right now. He seemed to accept this explanation, moving on to tell me about a science project his class was starting. But the question lingered in my mind as we continued our day together. When Richard returned to pick up Thomas, his demeanor had changed. The defensiveness was gone, replaced by a subdued thoughtfulness. "Mom," he said as Thomas gathered his things, "Amanda and I have been talking. We understand things need to change. We'd like to invite you over for dinner on Friday, just to talk." I considered this. I'd like that. But Richard, I want to be clear. I'm not coming back to the old arrangement. I know, he said, and for the first time since this began, I believed him. This isn't about childcare. It's about family. After they left, I stood in my doorway watching Richard's car disappear down the street. Thomas had left his caterpillar habitat on my coffee table, a small bridge between our worlds. I felt a cautious optimism stirring. Not that everything would be magically resolved, but that at least the conversation had begun. That night I called Patricia Henderson to update her on the developments. "He seems to be taking it seriously," I told her. "But I'm still proceeding with the changes to my will and the loan agreement." "That's wise," she affirmed. "Family relationships can be complicated, but financial matters should be clear." As I hung up, I glanced at Thomas's drawing. On my refrigerator and the formal loan agreement on my counter, symbols of love and boundaries coexisting in the same space. The coming days would reveal whether Richard truly understood the lesson I was trying to teach, that respect and love must flow in both directions, or they aren't truly either. The Friday dinner at Richard and Amanda's house was set for 6:30 p.m. I spent that morning in a state of nervous anticipation, changing my outfit 3 times before settling on a teal blouse I'd purchased during a recent shopping trip with Marjorie. It was more stylish than anything I'd worn during my childcare days, when practicality had been my only fashion consideration. As I drove to their house, a route I'd traveled thousands of times before, I felt different. Not just because of the new clothes or the freshly styled hair, another change I'd made in recent weeks, but because I was arriving as a guest rather than as help. I wouldn't be cooking, cleaning, or watching Thomas. I would be sitting at the table, participating in conversation, being seen. Amanda opened the door when I arrived, her smile tight but present. "Elaine, thank you for coming," she said, stepping back to let me enter. "Dinner's almost ready." The house seemed unchanged at first glance, but as I moved into the living room, I noticed small differences. Toys were scattered across the floor. A basket of unfolded laundry sat on the couch. Dishes from breakfast still lingered on the coffee table. Without me there to tidy up after everyone, the house had taken on a lived-in look that it never had during my tenure. Thomas bounded down the stairs when he heard my voice. "Grandma, you're here for dinner." He hugged me tightly, then pulled back to examine my face. "You look pretty." I smiled, touching my newly styled hair self-consciously. "Thank you, sweetheart." Richard emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a dish towel. "Mom, glad you could make it. I'm just finishing up the pasta." The role reversal was striking. Richard cooking, Amanda setting the table. Me sitting on the couch with Thomas, listening to him explain his latest video game without simultaneously folding laundry or preparing food. This was how family visits were supposed to be: shared responsibility, mutual respect. Dinner was a somewhat awkward affair. Richard had prepared spaghetti with meat sauce, a simple dish, but one he'd made with clear effort. Amanda kept glancing between Richard and me, as if waiting for the tension to break into full-blown conflict. Thomas, blissfully unaware of the undercurrents, chatted happily about school and friends. After dessert, store-bought cookies arranged on a plate, Amanda suggested Thomas go upstairs to play for a while so the adults could talk. Once he was out of earshot, Richard cleared his throat. Mom, Amanda and I have been doing a lot of thinking since you stepped back from helping us, he began. We realize we've taken advantage of your generosity. We've been looking at our finances, and we want to start repaying the loan. Amanda nodded. We've set up a budget. It's going to be tight, but we can manage $300 a month to start. I was surprised. The loan agreement I'd had drawn up called for $350 monthly, but I hadn't yet presented it to them. The fact that they'd come to this figure on their own felt significant. Thank you, I said sincerely. That would be a good start. Richard exhaled, seeming relieved. We also want to apologize for how we handled the childcare situation. We should have discussed it with you properly, not just announced changes. And we should have compensated you fairly for all you've done, Amanda added. We didn't value your time the way we should have. Their words were what I had wanted to hear, yet something still felt incomplete. They were acknowledging the financial and practical aspects of our relationship, but not the deeper hurt, the casual dismissal of my personhood, the reduction of my role to that of a convenience. I appreciate that, I said carefully. But there's something more fundamental that needs to be addressed. I turned to Richard. When you referred to me as just the maid who happens to be my mother, it wasn't just an offensive comment. It was a reflection of how you've come to see me, as someone whose primary value is in what I can do for you. Richard's face flushed. Mom, it wasn't like that. I was just talking without thinking. Sometimes, I replied, those are the moments when we reveal what we truly believe. I took a sip of water, gathering my thoughts. For 30 years, I've defined myself primarily as your mother. Every decision, every sacrifice was made with your well-being in mind. When Thomas was born, I expanded that identity to include being his grandmother. But somewhere along the way, I lost sight of who I am beyond those roles. Amanda shifted uncomfortably. We never meant to make you feel that way. I know, I acknowledged. And to be fair, I played my part in it too. I was so eager to be needed that I allowed boundaries to blur. I gave and gave without establishing healthy limits. I paused, feeling a new clarity as I spoke. That's changing now. I'm discovering who Elaine Bennett is apart from being Richard's mother or Thomas's grandmother. Richard looked surprised. Is that why you've been different lately? The new clothes, the hair, the house renovations? I nodded. Partly. But it's more than that. I'm taking classes. I'm reconnecting with friends. I'm making decisions based on what I want, not just on what would be most helpful to you. There was a moment of silence as they absorbed this. Then Richard said quietly, I didn't realize how much of yourself you'd set aside for us. Neither did I admitted. Not until I was forced to step back and really look at my life. I leaned forward, meeting his gaze directly. I don't regret the sacrifices I made for you, Richard. Being your mother has been the greatest joy of my life. But I do regret allowing myself to become invisible in the process. Amanda reached for her glass, her expression thoughtful. So where do we go from here? What does this mean for our family? It means building a new kind of relationship, I explained. One where I'm present as Elaine, a whole person with my own needs and boundaries, not just as a support system for your family. Richard nodded slowly. I think I understand. And we want that too, Mom. We want you in our lives, not just for what you can do for us. I smiled, feeling some of the tension ease. Then we're on the right path. After dinner, as Richard and Amanda cleared the dishes, another first, I went upstairs to see Thomas. He was building an elaborate structure with plastic blocks, his face screwed up in concentration. What are you making? I asked, sitting on the edge of his bed. A museum, he replied without looking up. For important things. That sounds wonderful. What kinds of important things? He placed another block carefully on top of his structure. Things that tell stories about people, like in real museums. His answer touched something deep inside me. Even at 6, Thomas understood the value of stories, of history, of the objects that connect us to who we are. I watched him build for a while, marveling at how perceptive children can be. When it was time for me to leave, Thomas insisted on walking me to the door. As I hugged him goodbye, he whispered, "I'm glad you're still my grandma." "I'll always be your grandma," I assured him. "That will never change." Driving home, I found myself reflecting on the evening with unexpected optimism. The conversation had been difficult, but necessary, a first step toward redefining our family dynamics. But the most profound change wasn't in Richard or Amanda. It was in me. The woman who had driven to that dinner wasn't the same one who had overheard Richard's dismissive comment weeks ago. That Elaine had been shattered by his words, her entire sense of self called into question. This Elaine was emerging stronger, more defined, with an identity that extended beyond her family roles. At home, I made a cup of tea and sat in my garden, now flourishing with early summer blooms. The evening air was warm, scented with jasmine from the vine I'd planted along the fence. I had created this space with my own hands, a physical manifestation of my inner growth. My phone buzzed with a text from Marjorie. "How did it go with Richard? Still on for watercolor tomorrow?" I smiled as I replied, "Better than expected." Yes to watercolor, bringing scones from that bakery we tried last week. My life was filling with small, ordinary pleasures. A friend's text, a baking project, an art class. Things that had nothing to do with being a mother or grandmother, and everything to do with being Elaine. The following Tuesday, I met with Patricia Henderson again to finalize some details of my estate planning. Richard and Amanda have offered to start repaying the loan, I told her. They came up with the figure on their own. Patricia looked pleased. That's a positive sign. Do you still want to proceed with the formal agreement? I nodded without hesitation. Yes, things are moving in a good direction, but I've learned the importance of clear boundaries. The loan agreement protects both me and them. It establishes expectations and eliminates ambiguity. "And the changes to your will?" she asked. This question gave me pause. The anger that had initially driven me to disinherit Richard had softened. Our dinner conversation had shown me that he was capable of growth, of recognizing his mistakes. But the underlying issue, ensuring my assets were protected and my grandson provided for, remained valid. Let's keep the trust for Thomas, I decided. But instead of the token inheritance for Richard, let's structure something that acknowledges his efforts to make amends while still protecting my assets. Perhaps a percentage of the estate, but with conditions. Patricia made notes. I'll draft some options for you to consider. As I left her office, I felt a profound sense of peace. This wasn't about punishing Richard anymore. It was about honoring my own worth and creating a legacy that reflected my values. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with a notepad, writing down goals for the coming months. Travel to the Grand Canyon, take a photography course, host a dinner party for my new friends from the watercolor class. Simple things, but they represented the expansion of my world beyond the narrow confines I had accepted for so long. I was no longer just a mother, a grandmother, or anyone's maid. I was Elaine Bennett, artist, gardener, friend, student, teacher of boundaries, writer of her own story, and that was inheritance enough. The week following our dinner at Richard and Amanda's house brought an unexpected development. As I was finishing a watercolor painting in my newly designated art corner, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Amanda standing on my porch, looking uncharacteristically nervous. "Elaine," she said, fidgeting with the strap of her purse. "I hope I'm not interrupting. I was wondering if we could talk." I invited her in, curious about this solo visit. In all the years I'd known Amanda, we'd rarely spent time together without Richard or Thomas present. Our relationship had been cordial but distant, defined primarily by my role as Richard's mother and Thomas's caregiver. In the living room, Amanda perched on the edge of the sofa, her eyes taking in the changes I'd made to the space. The new paint color, the rearranged furniture, the watercolor paintings now framed and hanging on the walls. "Your house looks beautiful," she said. "You've done so much with it." "Thank you," I replied, settling into my armchair. "It's been therapeutic, actually, creating a space that reflects who I am now." Amanda nodded, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "That's partly why I'm here. I've been thinking a lot about what you said at dinner, about losing yourself in your role as Richard's mother and Thomas's grandmother." She paused, gathering her thoughts. I realized I've been heading down the same path. This confession surprised me. Amanda had always seemed so self-assured, so firmly in control of her identity as a professional woman, wife, and mother. "Before Thomas was born," she continued, "I had such clear ideas about the kind of mother I wanted to be, the kind of balance I wanted to maintain between my career and family. But then reality hit, and it was so much harder than I expected." She looked up at me, her expression vulnerable. "When you offered to help with childcare, it seemed like the perfect solution. I could advance in my career while knowing Thomas was with family." I nodded, encouraging her to continue. But over time, I started taking it for granted. I stopped seeing it as a gift and started seeing it as an entitlement. And the more I relied on you, the more I lost touch with aspects of motherhood I'd wanted to experience. She took a deep breath. "When you stepped back, I realized how dependent I'd become. Not just on your help, but on your guidance. I didn't know how to do so many things that you handled effortlessly." "Motherhood has a steep learning curve," I acknowledged, "and I had the advantage of years of experience." "That's just it," Amanda replied. "Instead of learning from that experience, I outsourced it, and now I feel like I'm playing catch-up with my own son." Her honesty touched me. It revealed a dimension of our situation I hadn't fully considered, that in my eagerness to be needed, I might have inadvertently undermined Amanda's confidence in her own maternal role. "It's never too late to change the dynamic," I said gently. "Thomas is still young. There's plenty of time for you to build the relationship you want with him." Amanda's eyes filled with unexpected tears. "I hope so. These past few weeks have been eye-opening, difficult but clarifying." She wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. "Anyway, that's not why I came. I wanted to talk to you about the loan." She reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope, placing it on the coffee table between us. "This is our first payment, $300 as we discussed. Richard and I have set up an automatic transfer from our account to yours every month." I was touched by this tangible gesture of good faith. "Thank you, Amanda. This means a lot." "There's something else," she added, her expression growing more serious. "I want to propose a formal schedule for Thomas to spend time with you, not as childcare, but as his grandmother." This request caught me by surprise. "What did you have in mind?" "Sunday dinners here at your house every week," she suggested. "And perhaps one Saturday a month, he could stay overnight with you. We'd drop him off and pick him up. No expectations of you coming to our house or taking on any household tasks." The proposal was thoughtful, establishing regular time for me to maintain my relationship with Thomas while respecting my new boundaries. But I was curious about her motivation. "May I ask why this is important to you?" I inquired. Amanda's expression softened. "Because Thomas loves you. Because you've been a constant positive presence in his life. And because—" She hesitated, then continued with newfound resolve. "Because I want him to know his grandmother, as a person, not just as someone who takes care of him." Her words echoed my own desires so perfectly that I felt a surge of emotion. "I would love that arrangement," I said sincerely. After Amanda left, I sat with the envelope containing the first loan payment, turning it over in my hands. It was more than money. It was recognition of my financial worth, a tangible acknowledgement that what I had given had value beyond familial obligation. The following Sunday marked the first of our new dinner arrangements. I prepared a simple roast chicken with vegetables, comfort food that had always been Richard's favorite as a child. As I set the table for 3, I realized this would be the first time Richard and Amanda had been guests at my table in years. Usually, I was the one joining them in their home, fitting into their schedule and preferences. They arrived promptly at 5, Thomas rushing ahead to show his father the caterpillar habitat, which had been upgraded to a larger container as its occupant grew. The caterpillar, now officially named Spike by Thomas, had nearly doubled in size. "He's going to make a cocoon soon," Thomas announced with authority, "and then he'll be a butterfly." "Actually, a moth," I corrected gently. "Tomato hornworms turn into sphinx moths." Richard watched our interaction with a bemused expression. "You've become quite the naturalist, Mom." "I've been taking a nature journaling class at the Botanic Gardens," I explained. "It's fascinating what you notice when you really observe the world around you." Dinner was relaxed, the conversation flowing more easily than it had during our previous meal together. Richard and Amanda shared updates about their work. Thomas regaled us with stories from school, and I talked about my classes and garden projects. No one mentioned childcare, schedules, or financial arrangements. We were simply a family enjoying a meal together. After dessert, a homemade apple crisp that Thomas had helped prepare, Amanda excused herself to use the restroom. Richard helped me clear the plates, carrying them to the kitchen with unaccustomed domesticity. "Mom," he said quietly as he stacked dishes by the sink. "I want you to know that I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about seeing you as more than just my mother or Thomas's grandmother." I paused, giving him my full attention. "I realized I've never really asked you about your life, your interests, your dreams, what makes you happy," he continued. "It's like I've had this one-dimensional view of you for so long that I stopped seeing the whole person. It's easy for that to happen in parent-child relationships," I acknowledged. "Roles become habits, and habits become limitations." Richard nodded thoughtfully. "Well, I want to change that. I want to know who you are beyond those roles. So I have a proposition." He glanced toward the dining room to make sure Thomas was still occupied with his drawing. "Amanda and I would like to pay for you to take that trip to the Grand Canyon you've always talked about. Not as a loan repayment, but as a gift, a recognition of all you've given us over the years." I was momentarily speechless. The Grand Canyon had been a dream of mine since my 20s, something Thomas Sr. and I had planned to do after retirement. After his death, it had remained a someday plan, always deferred in favor of more pressing needs and responsibilities. "That's incredibly generous," I managed finally. "It's the least we can do," Richard replied. "You deserve to start checking things off your bucket list, Mom, and we want to support that." That night, after they had gone, I sat in my garden under the stars, feeling a new equilibrium settling over my life. The boundaries I had established were beginning to bear fruit, not just in protecting my time and resources, but in reshaping how my family saw me and, more importantly, how I saw myself. Thus, following week brought another milestone. Patricia Henderson called to let me know the loan agreement had been officially filed and the revised will was complete. She suggested we meet to review the final documents. In her office, Patricia handed me the loan agreement, now signed by both, Richard and Amanda. "They came in yesterday," she explained. "No hesitation, no negotiation. They simply signed." This simple act of follow-through meant more to me than the money itself. It represented a commitment to our new understanding, a willingness to honor the worth of what I had given them. Next, Patricia placed the revised will before me. As we had discussed, it maintained the trust for Thomas while modifying Richard's inheritance. Instead of the token $1,000, he would now receive 30% of the estate, a significant amount, but still ensuring that the majority would be protected for Thomas's future. "There's one additional provision I've added," Patricia pointed out. "The 30% inheritance for Richard is conditional upon the full repayment of the loan. If the loan remains partially or fully unpaid at the time of your passing, the outstanding amount will be deducted from his share." The provision was fair, ensuring that Richard couldn't simply wait out the loan repayment in anticipation of a larger inheritance later. It balanced generosity with accountability, much like the new relationship we were building. I signed the will, feeling the weight of the decision, but also its rightness. This wasn't about punishment anymore. It was about protection and principle. About ensuring that the boundaries I was establishing in life would extend beyond it. As I left Patricia's office, I checked my phone to find a text from Susan, my friend, from watercolor class. "Art festival this weekend in Boulder. Several of us are going. Join us?" 2 months ago, I would have automatically checked Richard and Amanda's schedule before committing to anything. Now, I simply texted back, "Count me in." The sun was bright as I walked to my car, illuminating the mountains in the distance. The Grand Canyon was waiting. And so was the rest of my life, not as anyone's mother or grandmother or helper, but as Elaine Bennett, a woman coming into her own power, setting boundaries not as walls, but as the foundation for healthier, more balanced relationships with the people she loved most. By mid-July, a new rhythm had established itself in my relationship with Richard, Amanda, and Thomas. The Sunday dinners at my house had become a cherished tradition, with each member of the family contributing in their own way. Richard would often bring a bottle of wine or ingredients for a special dish. Amanda would arrive with fresh flowers, or a dessert she'd baked. Thomas always carried something he'd made during the week, a drawing, a craft project from school, or sometimes just an interesting rock he'd found. These gatherings were different from our previous interactions. No one expected me to handle everything. We cooked together, cleared the table together, shared the cleanup. The conversation flowed more naturally, touching on topics beyond the immediate concerns of daily life. Books we were reading, current events, memories of the past viewed through new lenses. It was during one of these dinners that Amanda mentioned her upcoming work conference in Chicago. "It's a 3-day event," she explained, serving herself another helping of green beans. Richard was planning to take time off to be with Thomas, but his team just landed a major client, and they need him for the presentations. I could feel the familiar pull, the automatic urge to offer my help, to step in and solve their problem. Before, I would have immediately volunteered to watch Thomas, rearranging my own schedule without a second thought. Now, I waited. Amanda set down her fork. "We were wondering if you might consider watching Thomas those 3 days. It would be at your house, of course, and we'd make sure he has everything he needs. We'd pay you properly this time, the standard rate for childcare in the area." The request was different from previous ones. It acknowledged my boundaries. It offered fair compensation. It framed childcare as a service they were requesting, not an obligation I should fulfill. "I'd need to check my calendar," I said, taking a sip of wine. "I have a watercolor workshop on Thursday that I've already paid for, and I've been looking forward to it." Richard nodded. "That's completely fair, Mom. Maybe we could work around that? Thomas could go to his after-school program that day, and I could try to leave work early." The ease with which they accepted my hesitation, without guilt trips or manipulation, was striking. This was what respect looked like, recognizing that my time had value, that my commitments mattered. "Let me think about it and check my schedule," I said. "I'll let you know by Tuesday." Later that week, I met Marjorie for our regular lunch. Over salads at our favorite cafe, I shared the childcare request and my mixed feelings about it. "It sounds like they're trying," Marjorie observed. "The question is whether you actually want to watch Thomas those days. Not whether you should, or whether it would help them," but whether it's something you'd enjoy. Her framing of the question surprised me. I'd spent so many years evaluating decisions based on what others needed that considering my own desires felt almost radical. I do miss spending extended time with Thomas, I admitted. And I've been curious about this new science project he keeps talking about. But I don't want to slip back into old patterns. Marjorie nodded thoughtfully. Then set clear parameters, specific hours, specific responsibilities. Make it a special grandma camp with activities you both enjoy, not just you stepping in to maintain their household routine. That evening, I called Richard. I've thought about the childcare request, I told him. I can watch Thomas Wednesday through Friday, but with a few conditions. Of course, Richard replied. What are you thinking? He'll stay at my house, not yours. I'll pick him up from school each day at 3 and drop him off at school each morning. I have my watercolor workshop on Thursday from 10 to 2, so you'll need to arrange coverage during those hours. That's fair, Richard agreed. We appreciate your flexibility. As for payment, I continued, the standard rate for childcare in our area is $20 per hour. That would be $240 per day for 12 hours, or $720 for the 3 days. Given our family relationship, I'm comfortable with $500 total. There was a brief pause, not of resistance, but of adjustment. This was new territory for both of us. Explicitly, discussing financial compensation for my time. That's more than fair, Richard said finally. We'll have it ready before Amanda leaves for her trip. After we hung up, I sat in my garden, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. The conversation had been straightforward, businesslike, yet not cold. It established the value of my time while preserving the warmth of our family bond. I had set terms that respected my own needs while still helping my family. It felt like balance. When Thomas arrived for his 3-day stay, he was bubbling with excitement. Grandma, I brought my science kit. Can we do experiments in your garden? Absolutely. I agreed. I've cleared a space on the patio table, but first let's go over our schedule for the next few days. I showed him the simple chart I'd created outlining our daily activities. Breakfast time, school drop-off and pickup, free play, dinner preparation, reading time, bedtime. It was similar to the structure I'd maintained when caring for him regularly, but with a key difference. This was a temporary arrangement with clear boundaries, not an open-ended commitment. And here, I said, pointing to Thursday morning, is when I'll be at my painting class. Your dad will pick you up from school for lunch and then bring you back here afterward. Thomas nodded, studying the schedule with serious concentration. Can we add caterpillar checking after breakfast? Spike might make his cocoon any day now. I smiled, adding his suggestion to our chart. Perfect. Those 3 days with Thomas were different from my previous caregiving role. Without the weight of constant availability, I found myself more present, more engaged. We conducted messy science experiments in the kitchen, planted sunflower seeds along the fence, read books about moths and butterflies. I wasn't juggling his care with household chores or worrying about dinner preparations for Richard and Amanda. I was simply being his grandmother, teaching, playing, connecting. On Friday afternoon, Amanda returned from her conference, arriving at my house to pick up Thomas. She looked refreshed, energized by the professional development opportunity. How did it go? I asked as Thomas gathered his belongings. Really well, she replied. I got to present some of my research, and I made some valuable connections. She reached into her purse and handed me an envelope. Here's the payment we agreed on. Thank you so much for making this possible. I accepted the envelope with a nod. It was my pleasure. Thomas and I had a wonderful time. As they prepared to leave, Thomas threw his arms around my waist. Can I come stay with you again sometime, Grandma? Even when Mom and Dad don't have work trips? Amanda met my eyes over Thomas's head, her expression open. That would be lovely. Maybe we could make it a regular thing. 1 weekend a month, just you and Grandma. This suggestion, offering more time with Thomas, not less, reflected how far we'd come. Rather than limiting my role out of fear or jealousy, Amanda was recognizing the value of my relationship with Thomas as something separate from their needs. "I'd like that very much," I said sincerely. After they left, I opened the envelope. Inside was a check for $600, $100 more than we had agreed upon, and a handwritten note for the extra science supplies and garden seeds. "Thank you for being such a wonderful grandmother." The acknowledgement of the additional expenses I'd incurred, small as they were, indicated a new awareness of the costs, both financial and personal, that I had absorbed without comment for years. The following week brought another significant shift. Richard called on Tuesday evening, his voice tight with stress. "Mom, I hate to ask this, but we have an emergency at work. A major client is threatening to pull their account, and we need all hands on deck for damage control. Amanda has a court hearing she can't reschedule. Is there any chance you could pick up Thomas from school today? It would just be for a few hours." In the past, I would have immediately said yes, dropping whatever plans I had. But today, I had a scheduled session with Diane, my financial advisor, to review my investment portfolio, an appointment I had been looking forward to. "I'm sorry, Richard, but I have an important meeting this afternoon that I can't reschedule," I replied. "Have you tried Thomas's after-school program, or perhaps one of the parents from his class?" There was a pause, then Richard said, "You're right. I should try those options first. I just automatically thought of you. Old habits." "I understand," I said gently. "It's an adjustment for all of us. If those options don't work out, would you be willing to help? I could pay you for your time, of course, and reschedule your meeting." I considered this. "If you exhaust all other options, call me back. But really try, Richard. This is part of being a working parent, having backup plans for childcare emergencies." After we hung up, I felt a momentary twinge of guilt. Was I being unnecessarily rigid? But then I reminded myself that this was exactly the kind of boundary that needed to be established. I was no longer the automatic, default solution to every childcare problem. Richard called back 30 minutes later. "Crisis averted," he reported. "I reached out to the mother of Thomas's friend Liam. They're having a playdate after school, and she's happy to keep Thomas until one of us can pick him up." "That's wonderful," I said, genuinely pleased. "Building a community of support is important." "You were right to push me to find another solution," Richard acknowledged. "It's too easy to fall back on asking you, even when there are other options available." This was the power shift in action, not a rejection of my role in their lives, but a rebalancing of responsibility. Richard and Amanda were developing their own resources and networks, rather than depending solely on me. And I was maintaining healthy boundaries without compromising my love and support for my family. That evening, as I prepared for my meeting with Diane, I found myself reflecting on how much had changed in just a few months. The woman who had once defined herself primarily through service to others was now honoring her own needs and interests. The family that had once taken her availability for granted was now respecting her boundaries and valuing her time. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of tension, old habits that tried to reassert themselves. But with each interaction, each decision, each boundary maintained, the new dynamic became more established. The inheritance revision that had begun as an act of hurt and anger had evolved into something more nuanced, a restructuring of relationships based on mutual respect and recognition of worth. As I gathered my financial documents for the meeting, I smiled at the irony. In protecting my assets, I had discovered my own value. August arrived with a heat wave that turned Denver into a shimmering mirage of asphalt and glass. My garden required daily watering, a task I embraced in the cool morning. Hours before the sun reached its full strength, on one such morning as I carefully directed the hose around my thriving tomato plants, I was surprised to see a familiar car pull into my driveway. Dr. Mitchell Harris, my neighbor from 3 houses down, stepped out with a wide-brimmed hat and gardening gloves. "Morning, Elaine. Thought you might want some company for garden duty. Mine's already done for the day." Mitchell was a retired oncologist who had moved to the neighborhood 2 years ago. We'd exchanged pleasantries over the years, but had never spent significant time together until recently, when we discovered a mutual interest in native plants at a community garden workshop. "I could use the help," I admitted, gesturing toward the tomato cages that needed reinforcing. "These plants have grown far more enthusiastically than I anticipated." For the next hour, Mitchell and I worked side by side, securing tomato vines, pulling weeds, and discussing the merits of different mulching techniques. The conversation flowed easily, touching on books we'd read, places we'd traveled, and the subtle pleasure of growing things. "I'm hosting a dinner party next Saturday," Mitchell mentioned as we finished up. "Nothing fancy, just a few neighbors and friends. I'd love it if you'd join us." In the past, I might have automatically checked whether Richard needed me that weekend. Now, I simply smiled and said, I'd enjoy that very much. The dinner party marked another step in my expanding social circle. Besides Mitchell, there were 2 other couples from the neighborhood, a former colleague of his from the hospital, and Susan from my watercolor class. The evening was filled with lively conversation, delicious food, and a sense of connection I hadn't experienced in years. As September approached, I found myself with a calendar that reflected the richness of my newly balanced life. Sunday dinners with Richard, Amanda, and Thomas. Thursday lunches with Marjorie. Watercolor classes on Tuesdays. A book club meeting every 3rd Wednesday. Coffee with Mitchell on Saturday mornings, which had become a pleasant ritual following the dinner party. And most excitingly, my long-awaited trip to the Grand Canyon, scheduled for the first week of October. True to their word, Richard and Amanda had arranged everything: flights, accommodations at a historic lodge on the canyon rim, and a guided hiking tour suitable for my fitness level. "You'll need good hiking boots," Susan advised during one of our watercolor sessions, "and a hat with a wide brim. The sun is intense, even in October." "I've got a great pair of boots you can borrow," Marjorie offered. "Barely used. I bought them for that trip to Sedona that got canceled." Mitchell contributed a detailed map of the canyon trails and a small field guide to the local flora. "The plant life at different elevations is fascinating," he explained. "You'll see ecological zones that would take thousands of miles of horizontal travel to encounter elsewhere." The enthusiasm and support of my friends added another dimension to the trip's significance. This wasn't just about seeing a natural wonder I'd dreamed of visiting for decades. It was about embracing a life where my desires and interests took center stage. 2 weeks before my trip, I received an unexpected call from Amanda. "Elaine, I'm sorry to bother you," she began, her voice tight with stress. "But I'm in a difficult situation. My mother has fallen and broken her hip. She's having surgery tomorrow in Boulder, and I need to be there." "Of course," I said immediately. "Is there anything I can do to help?" "That's why I'm calling," Amanda admitted. "Richard has a client presentation he can't reschedule, and we're struggling with what to do about Thomas. I know you're preparing for your trip, and I hate to ask, but is there any chance you could watch him for a couple of days?" This was exactly the kind of situation that would have automatically received a yes from me in the past. Now, I paused to consider my own schedule and needs. I had appointments with both Diane and Patricia that week, finalizing details for my trip and updating some aspects of my financial planning. "Let me think about how we might make this work," I said carefully. "What days are we talking about?" "Wednesday and Thursday," Amanda replied. I know it's a lot to ask. I considered the request thoughtfully. This wasn't Amanda taking advantage. It was a genuine family emergency. And I did want to help, not out of obligation, but out of love for my family and concern for Amanda's mother. I can watch Thomas, I decided. But I have appointments on both days that I need to keep. What if he comes with me? The meetings aren't long, and he could bring some books or activities. Amanda's relief was palpable. That would be amazing, Elaine. Thank you so much. We'll pay you, of course, and make sure he has everything he needs to keep himself occupied during your appointments. There's no need for payment in this case, I said gently. This is family helping family during an emergency. It's different from our regular arrangement. The distinction felt important, acknowledging that there were indeed times when family members should step up for each other without financial compensation, while still maintaining the principle that my regular time and assistance had monetary value. Thomas arrived Wednesday morning with his backpack full of books, activity sheets, and small toys. He was subdued, aware that his grandmother was in the hospital. "Is Grandma Carol going to be okay?" he asked as we drove to my appointment with Diane. "Yes, sweetheart," I assured him. "Hip surgeries are very common for older people. She'll need some time to recover, but she'll be fine." At Diane's office, Thomas settled at a small table in the corner with his books while Diane and I reviewed my accounts. The quarterly loan payments from Richard and Amanda had been arriving promptly, gradually rebuilding my retirement savings. "You're in good shape for your Grand Canyon trip," Diane observed, "and your overall financial health has improved significantly in the past few months." Thomas looked up from his book. "Grandma's going to the Grand Canyon. She's going to take lots of pictures for my school project." Diane smiled at him. "Your grandma is a very smart lady. She's making sure she can do all the fun things she wants to do." The comment, simple as it was, struck me as profound. I was indeed making sure I could do what I wanted to do, not just financially, but emotionally and practically. I was creating space for joy, adventure, and self-discovery after decades of putting others first. The following day, Thomas accompanied me to Patricia's office. He was more nervous about this appointment, sensing perhaps that it involved serious adult matters. "This is where you changed your will, right?" he asked as we walked into the building. Dad mentioned it once to Mom. I was surprised by his awareness. "Yes, this is my lawyer's office. We're just updating some paperwork today." Patricia greeted Thomas warmly, offering him a juice box from her small office refrigerator and showing him where he could sit. Once he was settled with his activities, she turned to me with the documents I needed to review. "The trust for Thomas is now fully established," she explained, keeping her voice low. "And the conditions for Richard's inheritance are clearly specified. The only thing left to decide is whether you want to make any further adjustments based on recent developments." I thought about the changes in my relationship with Richard and Amanda over the past months, the respect they had shown for my boundaries, the prompt loan payments, the way they had arranged and funded my Grand Canyon trip. There had been genuine growth on all sides. "I think we can increase Richard's share to 40%, I decided. The condition regarding full loan repayment should remain, but I'd like to add a clause specifying that the remaining 60% in Thomas's trust can be used for educational expenses at any age, not just after 25. Patricia made notes on the document. "That's a generous adjustment, Elaine. It acknowledges the progress in your relationship while still protecting your primary concerns." As we drove home afterward, Thomas asked unexpectedly, "Grandma, are you mad at my dad?" The question caught me off guard. "What makes you ask that?" "Sweetheart?" He shrugged, looking out the window. "Sometimes I hear Mom and Dad talking about how things are different now, how they have to be careful not to ask too much from you." I chose my words carefully. "I'm not mad at your dad. We had some disagreements about how to treat each other, and we're figuring out better ways to be a family. Sometimes adults need to make changes in how they relate to each other, just like you might need to set boundaries with friends at school." Thomas nodded thoughtfully. "Like when Zachary always wanted to copy my math homework, and I had to tell him to do his own work." "Exactly like that," I agreed, impressed by his understanding. Setting boundaries isn't about being mad, it's about making relationships healthier. That evening, after Thomas was asleep, Richard called to check in. "How's everything going? Thomas isn't being too much trouble, is he?" "Not at all," I assured him. We had a good conversation today, actually. He asked if I was mad at you. There was a pause. What did you tell him? The truth. That we had disagreements about how to treat each other, and we're working on better ways to be a family. Richard was quiet for a moment. That's a good way to put it. Another pause. Mom, I've been meaning to say, I'm sorry for how I spoke about you that day, calling you just the maid. It was thoughtless and cruel, and it didn't reflect how I truly value you. The apology, so long in coming, took me by surprise. Thank you, Richard. That means a lot to me. If I'm honest, he continued, I think I was trying to impress Mark. He's always bragging about his household staff, his expensive childcare. I wanted to sound like I had it all figured out too, but that's no excuse. No, it's not, I agreed. But I understand the impulse, and I appreciate you acknowledging it. After we hung up, I sat in my garden, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. Richard's apology had closed a circle, healing the wound that had started this entire journey. Yet I found myself grateful for that painful moment, for the clarity it had provided, the changes it had catalyzed. If he hadn't spoken those hurtful words, would I ever have recognized how unbalanced our relationship had become? Would I have continued sacrificing my own needs indefinitely, depleting my resources and diminishing my sense of self? Would I now be planning a trip to the Grand Canyon, surrounded by new friends, engaged in activities that nourished my spirit? The answer, I suspected, was no. Sometimes it takes a moment of stunning clarity, even a painful one, to illuminate the path forward. October. Arrived with crisp mornings and golden afternoons. The day before my Grand Canyon trip, I hosted a special Sunday dinner at my house. Richard, Amanda, and Thomas were there, of course, but so were Marjorie, Susan, and Mitchell. It was the first time my family and my new friends had all gathered. Together, a symbolic merging of the different facets of my life. The conversation flowed easily around the table. Richard and Mitchell discovered a shared interest in jazz. Amanda and Susan bonded over their experiences as working mothers. Thomas proudly showed everyone his latest science project, a detailed model of a moth's life cycle, inspired by Spike, whose cocoon had finally yielded a magnificent sphinx moth that we had released in the garden weeks earlier. As I looked around, at these people who meant so much to me in different ways, I felt a profound sense of wholeness. This was what balance looked like. Not the denial of family bonds or the rejection of caregiving roles, but the integration of those aspects of life with personal pursuits, friendships, and self-care. After dinner, as everyone was preparing to leave, Richard hung back. Mom, I have something for you, he said, handing me a small package wrapped in silver paper. Inside was a leather-bound journal with my initials embossed on the cover. For your Grand Canyon observations, he explained. I thought you might want to record your impressions, maybe even do some sketches. The thoughtfulness of the gift touched me deeply. It wasn't just a journal. It was recognition of my interests, my creativity, my inner life beyond family roles. Thank you, I said, hugging him. I'll treasure this. The following morning, Mitchell drove me to the airport. Take lots of pictures, he urged as we said goodbye at the departure terminal. I want to hear all about it when you get back. His words held a promise of continuity, of life going on, of connections maintained, of stories yet to be shared. As I boarded the plane, journal in hand, I felt not like a woman fleeing a painful situation, but like one embracing a new chapter. Standing at the rim of the Grand Canyon 3 days later, watching the sunrise paint the ancient rock formations, in shades of gold and rose, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought me here. Not just the physical journey from Denver to Arizona, but the emotional one from taken-for-granted caregiver to a woman fully claiming her worth. I opened Richard's journal and began to write. not just about the breathtaking landscape before me, but about the internal landscape I had traversed. The pain of feeling devalued, the courage to establish boundaries, the joy of rediscovering my own interests, the comfort of building community, the grace of finding balance. The inheritance changes that had begun as a reaction to hurt had evolved into something more profound, a restructuring of relationships based on mutual respect and recognition of worth. The revocation of Richard's automatic claim to my assets had become a revision of our family dynamics, one that benefited all of us in unexpected ways. As I closed the journal and prepared for my first canyon hike, I realized that the most valuable inheritance I could leave my family wasn't financial at all. It was the example of a life lived with self-respect, clear boundaries, and open-hearted love. The legacy of a woman who had finally understood that being a devoted mother and grandmother didn't require the sacrifice of her own identity. The morning sun warmed my face as I stepped onto the trail, ready for whatever vistas awaited me, in the canyon and beyond. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.